Oh, we talked about transports. Remember transporters? And this diagram looks a lot like the transporter one. It's just that there we had two lines. We had the solid and the dotted line and all of that. It's generally the same idea. Basically, the rate of product formation increases as the substrate concentration increases, but we're going to reach a plateau at some point because we only have so many enzymes. So it's just like the example I gave you with the bus, right? If you have 40 people waiting at the bus stop and the bus has 40 seats, you're going to transport 40 people an hour. If you have 45 people waiting at the bus stop, 40 people are transported per hour. So you'll increase however much that you have in terms of substrate. You're going to increase how quickly the substrates are converted to product, but only to a point, and that point is at the saturation point. At that point, we plateau. So it's very intuitive in that respect. Now, the next topic we're going to look at is something called the law of mass action, and this is not too tricky. It's interesting though, because in this class so far, we've talked a lot about concentration gradients and things wanting to move from high concentration to low, and or solute gradients, things want to go to where there's more solute, those types of things. And honestly, that's kind of what the law of mass action is about. This particular concept applies only to reactions that are bidirectional, so forward and backward reactions. And as we said, this isn't common, but the same enzyme will catalyze the reaction. So over here, we have water and we have carbon dioxide, and that is going to be converted to carbonic acid, and then there should be a bidirectional arrow here too, but for some reason it's only showing it go to the right. And then there's our bicarbonate and hydrogen. So if you want to write, if you're not sure what these compounds are, we have water, we have carbon dioxide, carbonic acid, bicarbonate, and hydrogen. And we have seen this part of that reaction before. And this is the second time in the class we're going to see it. We'll see it another time, one more time after this. So I want to explain a little bit about what's happening with this reaction. We know that this reaction, as we talked about with buffering, we know that this reaction is responsible for helping to maintain the blood pH between 7.35 and 7.45. That's its job, okay? And so what happens is, and when we get into the respiratory system, which I think is next week already in lab, we're going to see that essentially we are going to have produced in our cells carbon dioxide, right? So our cells, they take in oxygen, they make energy, and they produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct of making ATP. And carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the cell, go into the bloodstream, where it can combine with water. And the water, of course, comes from the plasma, and that can form carbonic acid. Okay, now, we know that then this reaction bounces back and forth, bicarbonate and hydrogen, or back to carbonic acid, depending upon if the pH is too high, too low, right? That's our buffer. That's what we try to keep. So carbon dioxide essentially is something we call a volatile acid, which is interesting because you don't think about carbon dioxide as being acidic, but it is. Basically, if our buffer systems are all saturated, then carbon dioxide can ultimately form a lot of hydrogen. And so that way it is acidic to our system. So if you hold your breath, breathe in real deep, take in a lot of oxygen, your cells use it up, they make energy, they make the CO2, the CO2 goes into your bloodstream, you don't exhale it, it backs up, it builds blood sugar up. And as a result, your blood becomes too acidic. You have to exhale it. You actually can't kill yourself by holding your breath. A kid can throw a temper tantrum all they want. They are not gonna, they might turn red, they might turn a little blue, but ultimately they gotta exhale. That's just how it is under normal circumstances. Like if you're inebriated because of drugs or alcohol or something like that, it's true that your respiratory centers can be affected in your brain, in which case you will not. But, you know, normally you can't kill yourself that way. So essentially, that's where we get this first part of the reaction. This happens in the tissue space. It's carbon dioxide and water combine in the bloodstream to form carbonic acid, and then we buffer back and forth. Now, the law of mass action states that the direction of a reaction is from the side of an equation where the concentration is higher to the side where the concentration is lower. Now, carbonic anhydrase works right here. So you can even write in your notes Ca, carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase catalyzes the reaction of water and CO2 to carbonic acid and carbonic acid back to H2O and CO2. So it's bidirectional. It's a bidirectional enzyme. Not very common that an enzyme works in two directions. Okay, so law of mass action. We move from the side of the reaction where we have a lot of something to the side where we have less of something. So as I mentioned, okay, this is a bidirectional reaction. It can go to the right, it can go to the left. In the tissues, in the capillaries, we have water and carbon dioxide galore, right? Because the cells are making all this CO2, and essentially we are not getting rid of that yet. So we have less bicarbonate and hydrogen at the end. So this reaction in the tissue capillaries is favored to go to the right, from where we have a lot of something to where we have less of something. When we get up to the capillaries in the lungs, where we're exhaling, now we're getting rid of the CO2. Now we have less CO2 and water, and so this reaction is favored to go to the left, right? Because we have less CO2. So we go from the side where we have more to the side where we have less. Does that make sense? That's the law of mass action. And that reaction illustrates it very well. Do you have any questions? All right, so last topic for this part of the chapter is metabolic pathways. This will get us all set up for the next chapter, which you'll love. I know. I have a funny story to tell you when we get there, but not yet. All right, that's a teaser. If you're not teased, you don't care. Okay. All right, well, anyway, metabolic pathways are a sequence of pathways. So a sequence of basically reactions that occur that get us from an initial substrate all the way to a final product. So, for example, in our bodies, we take in glucose. Glucose is our substrate. Our final product, ultimately, will be ATP, which is energy. That's what we get from our glucose molecules. So we start out with our initial substrate, and we have enzyme 1 that acts on substrate A to give us product B. Now that enzyme is finished. It can't work on product B, right? It can only work on more substrate A when it comes along. Enzyme 1, its job is finished. Now, product B becomes a substrate for enzyme 2. Enzyme 2 works on substrate B to make product C. Enzyme 2 is done. Product C becomes the substrate for enzyme 3. Enzyme 3 works on product C, or I should say substrate C, to make product D, and so forth and so on until we get to our final product. And as Mike asked earlier today, what happens if one of these enzymes has like one amino acid substituted, it doesn't fold correctly, and the active site is a problem? You can't get through this whole pathway to get to your final product, just like melanin, like I mentioned earlier. All right, so end product inhibition is interesting. This occurs when you have a product in a divergent pathway where this product inhibits activity of a branch point enzyme. So if we have a pathway that at a certain point we have an enzyme, in this case it's enzyme 3. This enzyme can, if it's, so for example, we have enzyme 3' and we have enzyme 3. Enzyme 3' will produce a different product than enzyme 3 will, depending upon what's needed. So for example, we talk about blood sugar regulation, insulin, glucagon, right? Depending upon the blood sugar levels, we might need one or the other. We might need insulin if the sugar levels, if they're too high. We might need glucagon if they're too low. So it depends. So what happens? Okay, so for example, if we have, say, glucagon that we need to produce, okay, we might take this pathway. Now, if this product, if, you know, we ultimately get glucose being produced, glucose is being released into the bloodstream, we get too much of it, then we don't need the glucagon. The glucagon is going to be out there in the blood and we don't need it anymore. So it's going to accumulate and become not necessary. So what happens is that the glucagon can actually bind to another site on the branch point enzyme 3' and stop its action. And the other pathway will be favored to maybe produce insulin. So this is what we call allosteric inhibition. Allosteric means other site. So when you build up a product at the end of a pathway, it builds up, it accumulates, it's not necessary. That product will bind to another site on our branch point enzyme and another pathway is favored. Do you have any questions about that?
Yeah, well, we're supposed to know the difference between enzyme prime and a regular enzyme?
No, just an example. It's not a real enzyme, it's just to illustrate it.
Oh.
It's not like...
So enzyme prime is not a thing?
So what do you want us to know about this? What's the basic point?
The basic point is that end product inhibition occurs by way of allosteric inhibition. So you have enzymes working in a pathway, they build up a final product. If the final product isn't necessary anymore, it binds to another site, that's allosteric inhibition, so that another pathway can be favored, just like with insulin and glucagon, and that helps to maintain homeostasis. That's the main
that part made way more sense. You should teach it all that way.
What did I do?
You just like made it simple.
Yeah,
like,
just repeat the main point again, please.
So every time I do a slide and I explain, I just say, and the main point is.
Well, no. But it's like
that might help.
The whole. It's like trying to decode messages.
Decode messages.
Like when you break it down, you break it down in such detail that it becomes overwhelming. Okay. But when you break it down to like A, B, C. Like, oh, ABC makes sense. The whole pathway, like the real, like, specific way you got there doesn't make sense because we don't understand the specific way yet.
Right.
It's like, I can read a sentence easier than I can read a novel.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, give me the sentence, then give me the novel.
Well, probably you want the summary of the novel before you read the novel.
Well, yeah, bad analogy, but
you
get what I'm saying.
I get it,
yeah.
I get you.
Well, let's watch the movie before we read the book.
No.
No, you always read the book first.
No, that's still too much. What's your question? Yeah.
If it's unnecessary to bind, or unnecessary to bind, it's like that is needed to bind.
Well, okay, it's kind of like, you know how we were talking about cofactors earlier? We said that, like, you know, cofactors, when they bind, they can, like, start an enzyme's action. We said that. Okay, in a way,
To stop
you're stopping the action, right? So that the final product, it will bind not to the active site of the enzyme, but it binds to another site, like how cofactors bind to another site. And then this way, you stop. It just stops its action, so it's not like it's. I mean, if.
So you're not going to
Yeah, like okay, to maintain homeostasis, you want to make sure that you don't get too much of something or too little of something, right? So that's why I was given like the blood sugar analogy, is because you don't want too much blood sugar. You want to keep it like 70 to 110
So what
milligrams per deciliter. Yeah.
does stops like blood sugar from producing?
It stops the blood sugar from becoming, in the example I was giving, and again, this is just like illustrating it. These aren't real enzymes. They're just labeling them like numbers and prime, and just to try to distinguish that they're different. But these aren't like actual names of them. But the idea is that if this pathway is favored, say we produced a lot of glucagon, now our blood sugar has gone up to the homeostatic range it needs to be. Now the glucagon's not going to work anymore, so it builds up in the blood. It's still there, but you don't like to. So it basically stops production of glucagon by the glucagon that's accumulating binding to another site on the enzyme to stop it from producing more glucagon. Yeah, and then you go to the other pathway, which is for insulin, and I mean you're always bouncing back and forth that way to maintain homeostasis.
So it stops?
It stops production, and in this example, it stops production of glucagon, and it will start production of insulin.
So it
Because
starts production of
something else that's necessary to maintain that homeostasis, because you're always going up and then you go down and you want, so insulin and glucagon.
So when you say change to inactive shape, but it's still active, but just in forming something else.
Well, remember how we said enzymes are a lot of times they're inactive and then they're activated. Otherwise, if they were always active, they might, cause the organ that produces them to self-digest and that type of thing. Enzymes can be turned on and turned off, like a key. You put a key in the lock.
But this specifically, this
Turns it off.
allosteric inhibition turns it off.
Yes, inhibition means to just
Right.
stop it, inhibit it, and turn it off. And then, and the allosteric part is that it's binding to another site, not the active site, but another site to stop this enzyme from producing more of that product. But then the other pathway
Starts it back up.
will start up, right, in order to maintain that homeostasis. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to try really hard to do what you said. All right, let's see now, this slide. The main point of this slide that we're looking at now is all about how metabolic errors can occur. So this is what we talked about earlier. So sometimes an enzyme isn't produced, just like with albinism, as we talked about. And if an enzyme is not produced, like what they're showing here with the big red circle, that means that this pathway ultimately can't form the product, the final product. Okay? Or what can happen is that the enzyme is there and it's functioning, but it's defective. So it might be overproducing something, it can't be stopped. Allosteric inhibition doesn't work on that particular enzyme. So as a result, you get an overproduction of a particular product, like in the condition PKU, phenylketonuria. I have a hard time saying that, I have to say it very slow. Phenylketonuria. You've heard of PKU before, I think. This is where somebody can't metabolize phenylalanine. It's an amino acid. They can't metabolize phenylalanine well. And so as a result, you get a buildup of phenylalanine in the brain, and this can cause issues with mental functioning. And so that's why children who have PKU, they're tested for PKU, you know, they write on cans of soda, things like that. You'll see it says contains phenylalanine. Child shouldn't take that in because they can't metabolize it properly. So 2 ways inborn errors of metabolism can occur. Either one, the enzyme isn't produced, so you can't get to the final product. Like in albinism, you can't make melanin. Or number 2, the enzyme is there and it's functioning, but it can't be stopped, and it just keeps producing and producing and producing this final product that you don't want, and it can be a problem. It can hinder things. Does that make sense? Okay, so the last slide shows us some of these types of metabolic defects. You can have different types of metabolic defects. We have issues with amino acid metabolism, so protein metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, or even lipid metabolism. So amino acid metabolism, we talked about 2 of these. We talked about albinism, where you can't produce melanin, and so you have susceptibility not just to skin cancer, but I mean to really bad burning. People who have, did you ever see that movie with Nicole Kidman years ago?
Batman Forever.
No, it was her, and she was living in this house with her 2 kids, and the kids couldn't go by the windows, and they had to keep everything dark. What was it called? The Others? I think it's called The Others.
Yeah.
That was a weird movie. Did you ever see it? If you didn't see it, you should watch it. I guess I could spoil it. Well, or do you not want to? Huh? Okay. Well, anyway, the kids, I guess the kids, you were led to believe that the kids they were very photosensitive because they had like albinism or something. Turned out in the end it was just that everything was sort of flipped around. Everything was very flipped around because she was scared that there were other people in the house that she thought were ghosts. It turned out that they were the ghosts. The kids and the mother were the ghosts. I think after the father died, they committed suicide or something. I don't know. It's been a long time since I saw that. She killed them. She killed herself.
I remember this one.
It gives me goosebumps. I have goosebumps. Yeah, no, it's cool though. It was a good movie. Like it was completely twists around like you wouldn't think it. Yeah, it was neat. But then the father came and he came to visit, but I don't know if he was actually alive or not. Or if he was just a ghost. He was a ghost too. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't clear about that part. Anyway, so albinism. There's also PKU, as I said. This is where you have an increase in phenylpyruvic acid, which can lead to epileptic seizures in children and also developmental delays and, again, cognitive issues if it's not detected and treated properly. There's another condition called maple syrup disease, which I think it's, I want to say, you can Google this, but I think it's because the urine or something smells like maple syrup, huh? Well, there's a lot of aromatic compounds actually that are produced from this. There is, or maybe it's the sweat or something that I forget what it was, but anyway, but what happens is that you're not metabolizing, again, amino acids properly. You get an increase in leucine, isoleucine, and valine, which again are very aromatic. They have a very distinctive smell, yeah, like aroma. And again, this can also lead to neural issues in the brain. There's also things like carbohydrate metabolism. We talked about lactose intolerance. That's where you can't produce the enzyme lactase. And so lactose can't be utilized. You get diarrhea, gas, all that kind of stuff. And so forth. So there are a lot of different ones that are on here. And it's interesting because you know some, but obviously some of these are more common than others. Like you've probably heard of PKU at some. Have you heard of PKU before? No. Have you often wondered why they had contains phenylalanine on the cans? You never saw that? Well, you're probably not looking because.
What kind of can?
I don't know. Like I think, well, sometimes things.
Like aerosols?
I'm trying to think what. Bless you. Yeah, I don't, huh?
No.
I don't know. You have to kind of look around. They're on. I don't drink soda or pop or whatever.
But that is what you're talking about is soda cans?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different kinds of cans. Oil cans, WD-40, like, you mean soda.
Yeah,
or
like
pop, if you're from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, like stuff you can consume. I guess some people might want to consume that.
Well, like you could do like an aerosol, like a hairspray that has, you know, also.
Well, I wouldn't consume that. No, it's about metabolism. So it's about, you know, human and how they can metabolize particular things. So it's what you can consume.
So you just want us to like kind of know what you touch base on this?
Mm-hmm.
Should we remember any of these lipids?
You know, if I mentioned it, I would just sort of look it
I don't
over.
think you mentioned any lipids, is my mistake.
No. PKU, albinism, maple syrup disease, lactose intolerance. Those are the things I talked about. Maybe I'll ask something. Diet pop. Yeah, sweeteners. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, like I said, well, you see what I drink. I mean,
And it also says it can be in protein-rich foods like milk and eggs.
okay. What about maple syrup disease? Check that out. I want to see that too, if you don't mind. I like the embossy.
Yeah, it says distinct maple sugar odor and earwax, sweat, and urine.
In earwax and in urine?
Sweat and in urine.
Oh, sweat.
And other weird things like high-pitched cry.
Huh.
Irregular sleep, weight loss, weak sucking ability.
Oh, that's the urine. It looks like maple syrup. Show the class. Do a little sneak. That does look like maple syrup, right? So you guys will always know where you were. All right, so I gotta tell you my funny little story now. You'll get a kick out of this. So one time there was take your kids to work day. You know how we actually do that once, like I think either each semester in the spring. I know we do it. And this woman brought her two girls to the class, and they were sitting they were sitting in the chair, okay? And they were very, very polite. They had their hands in their lap. They had two little dresses on. They were very, very like attentive. Just very good. And so after I was finished lecturing, this was the lecture that I did, they were sitting, and their mom got up, and they got up and they went like this. Well, that was just like church. They were like, this is so boring. They thought it was so boring. It was hilarious. Because it's not, like, this is not, like, set the world on fire exciting stuff, I can tell you. But it is, in a way, interesting. What we're going to be discussing for Chapter 4, this is the end of Chapter 4, basically. We talked earlier about enzymes as catalysts. We introduced what enzymes were for you and talked a little bit about how enzymes were controlled. And this is all about bioenergetics, which has to do with basically energy transfer, okay, and how we get energy. So the end of Chapter 4 is going to be about pretty much, number one, it'll be about the first and second law of thermodynamics and how that applies to metabolism. And secondly, we're going to talk about some types of coupled reactions. To this point in the class, we've only ever talked about hydrolysis and dehydration reactions. We haven't talked about some of these other things, but really we can kind of categorize reactions into two types. Either they build things up or they break things down. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. But coupled reactions specifically are those which are going to happen together. That's why they're called coupled. So we're going to get into that. But first and second law of thermodynamics. So obviously, this has been a hypothesis that was tested, retested, it became a theory, and now it's a law. So these things are pretty ironclad. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but we can transform it into different types. So a good example of this is we have the sun outside and we have the leaves on the trees. The sun is light energy. The leaves in the trees, they can take that light energy through photosynthesis, they can make glucose. We could take a leaf, well, probably wouldn't be too good, but we could take it, we could eat it. And our bodies would take the glucose energy that's in the leaf and convert it to the energy form that we can use, which is ATP. So we've basically gone from sunlight to the glucose energy to the ATP. Pretty much, that's what the first law is telling us. We don't create new energy, we don't destroy what's there. We basically recycle it and we transform it. But the second law states that with each energy transformation, we create disorder. We create entropy. That's what disorder is. And so that means that when the sunlight energy is converted to glucose energy, we have to have a bunch of reactions that take place to make that glucose. And essentially with every reaction that occurs in the body, every single reaction, one thing is always given off, and that's heat. Heat is another form of energy, which we lose every time we make some type of reaction occur in the body, okay? So when we release heat, we actually increase entropy or the disorder of our universe that's around us. Only free energy, energy that is in an organized state, can be used to do work. We call this free energy, energy that's in an organized state. Systems go from higher states of free energy to states of lower free energy. So this diagram shows us both the first and the second law of thermodynamics. Please don't think that it doesn't show both, because the first bullet point here says the second law dictates. Okay, a lot of times if I ask a question about this diagram, people will always assume it comes along with the second law of thermodynamics only, because it says second law up here as the first bullet point. But I'm telling you that this diagram shows both the first and second laws, and I'll explain. First of all, we're seeing the sun, okay? The sun is light energy. The light energy is harvested by the leaf, the chloroplasts and all the stuff that absorbs the light. And we'll take that light energy and using carbon dioxide and water, we'll convert it to glucose, C6H12O6. When we as humans, if we were on here, we eat this plant, we're taking that glucose and we will convert it to ATP. Okay, so that's the first law illustrated. We get our energy transformations, not created nor destroyed, but energy transformations. Second law is also illustrated here, because if we see on this y-axis where it says free energy, remember free energy is energy in an organized state that we can use to do work. With every energy transformation from light to glucose, for example, notice that we lost a little bit of energy. That's why you see the glucose a little bit lower than the sun, showing that the free energy has dropped a little bit, because we lose some energy with every energy transformation. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question about that? that's basically it. First law is illustrated here because you see the sunlight being converted to glucose, so energy is not created new, it's not destroyed, it's just been transformed. Second law is illustrated because with every energy transformation, we lose a little bit of free energy. And again, usually what's given off is heat. Heat is another form of energy. We lose that with every reaction.
You lose free energy on the second.
The second law is all about how you basically, with the energy transformation, you lose some free energy with every, reaction that you have. Oh, I can bring my phone to see the time. Just stay here.
It's a quarter after.
I must have left it in the office. Does that help you, Ashton? Does that make sense? And Lagay, you good? Okay. All right, so that is basically first and second law of thermodynamics. Now we're going to talk a little bit about coupled reactions. And the first coupled reactions that we're going to talk about are endergonic and exergonic. So again, these happen together. Endergonic reactions are those where the product that we're producing has greater energy than our reactants. So for example, if I were to talk about transformation, endergonic, talking about transformation of, bless you, glucose and glucose to maltose. Okay, maltose has higher energy, has more energy than the two individual glucose molecules. Why? Anybody know why? Why would maltose, being a disaccharide, have more energy than monosaccharides?
Because there's two saccharides to draw from.
Right, that's good because you have two monosaccharides to draw from, but even more than this, we have more bonds in a bigger molecule. I don't know if you remember, but when we discussed triglycerides, I was explaining to you that triglycerides are such huge energy storage molecules because they have so many bonds in the fatty acid chains, and that's where your energy is. So the bigger the molecule, the more energy you can derive from it. On the other hand, exergonic reactions are those where the product that's produced has less energy than the reactant. So, if you want to think of it, ender means to put into. You're putting energy into your product. Exer means it's exiting. You're losing energy in your products. So if you take maltose and you go glucose and glucose, that's an exergonic reaction. So these are coupled because they do tend to happen together. Here we're taking a look at this diagram. It's showing us kind of in a very simplistic way glucose and oxygen, and then there's a bunch of steps, and then we convert it to carbon dioxide and water. This is kind of like what happens in cellular respiration. If we took a glucose molecule and we tried to release all the energy from it that we could get at once, guess what would happen? What? What did you do? I thought you meant like the... Yeah. Right. It'd be an explosion. You'd spontaneously combust. It's probably how people end up catching fire. No, I'm kidding. Did you ever hear that? People spontaneously combust? I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so you can't release it all at once. You have to release a little energy at a time. So that's why we need this metabolic pathway to get us there. And we need a series of reactions, reaction, and in doing that, we release a little energy. So here we're seeing, we start with glucose, which actually has the highest free energy because it has the most bonds, it's organized. And notice that as we go through each reaction, we lose a little bit of free energy each time until we get to our end product. So we do get a lot of energy that's lost through each reaction. So
Is that the example for the exergon?
yes, it is. Very good. I was just about to say that. Perfect. Yes. So basically, this is what they're showing here is exergonic because we're taking glucose and we're breaking some bonds up and we're releasing energy. We're making products that have less energy than the reactants, okay? So that in itself is exergonic. Where's the coupled part come in? What's happening here that's endergonic? What's happening is, in this case, the energy that they're saying that's produced is ATP. And ATP starts out as ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. It has 2 phosphates. And you're adding a phosphate to it to make adenosine triphosphate, 3 phosphates. So that in itself is endergonic because you're making ATP from ADP and phosphate. So that's the endergonic part. What's exergonic, just like you said, is that we're losing a little bit of the energy from glucose with each of these transformations. But to make the ATP, that's endergonic. So that's why they're coupled, because for everything that's losing energy, something has to gain it. It's basically the way that it is. Do you have any questions about that?
What did you say the sister?
What, sisters?
What did you call it?
Couple. No, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, you know, they're close. They happen together, right? They're like twins. Coupled, yeah. They happen together. They have to happen together. All right. Any other questions about this? Yes.
Sort of, but I don't know if we've gone to it yet. As far as metabolism goes, like in a human being, like you hear examples of like, oh, that skinny little kid's got a high metabolism. He eats and eats and eats and never gains weight. Is this that energy exergonic reaction? Is that like a little kid's hyper? He has high metabolism. His energy level's higher than a kid who might be,
Well,
have a slower metabolism. Is metabolism defined as that exergonic energy release?
Okay, not completely. Usually when a person has a high metabolism, that just means that their cells have a more efficient way of extracting energy from things.
It's not fast,
It's more efficient, and so they can, I guess in a way, the process itself takes calories. Okay, so if you're efficient and it's happening faster, that's going to use more calories so people can consume more. But the thing is, when you look at younger people, they tend to have more mitochondria in the cells, which is your powerhouse, right? So you have that. They have a greater oxygen extracting ability from the blood, which we're going to see you need. Well, you can see up here, you need to produce energy. You need oxygen, so you have a greater ability to extract the oxygen. As you tend to age, there are different things that happen that your cells actually change. So you don't have as many mitochondria. You're not going to have as easy a time extracting oxygen from the blood. You're also not going to make as many peroxisomes, which help with eliminating free radicals that can interfere with the metabolism process. So that's part of the reason why sometimes people can have a high metabolism. It's not, I mean, sure, it's part of it because this is part of metabolism, but there are certain actual features that the cells have in younger people than they have in older people. And, mainly it's some of those organelles that we're talking about.
Okay. So there's nothing you can do to, like, it's going to sound kind of stupid, probably. keep your metabolism strong. Through, like,
Exercise.
energy transfer, right? But
Exercise.
then that is an example of distributing energy, right? Like if I sit here, I'm not extrogenically releasing energy as much as I would be if I was going for a run.
Depends.
Which is also an example of thermodynamics, right? Because your body releases and then you sweat, which is an example of.
But what you're saying is partly true. Okay, obviously you're going to be utilizing more calories if you're exercising. However, if you're exercising, like if you are a fit person physically and you have good muscle definition, which is another thing that people tend to lose, really after the age of 30, you start losing muscle, and that's why it's so important to try to maintain it, because it's harder to get back whenever you get older.
So I'm just trying to root this concept and logic that I understand.
Muscle is very metabolically efficient, and muscle burns calories. Muscles burn the glucose and so forth, and they can extract energy far more efficiently if you have a lot.
So that's what I'm asking. Is that a practical example of kind of what the point you're trying to get across with this?
Yeah, you can say that's
just
part of it.
Just trying to relate it to something so I can remember it.
That's part of it. Yeah, I mean, the point of this is really endergonic versus exergonic reactions being coupled. That when you're releasing energy from one thing to make energy, that's exergonic to release the energy, and it's endergonic to make the energy. And that's the key thing. Yeah, we haven't really gotten into metabolism per se yet, but we're going to be.
Oh, yeah, I guess I thought this was the base of that, the base concept that leads to that.
Yes, I mean, these are some of the things we're leading up to it, for sure. And throughout metabolism, you have endergonic and exergonic reactions. And then you also have other types of reactions as well that we're going to get into. But I think what we'll do, what time is it now, first?
25 after.
Uh-oh.
We're done.
Well, let me finish this last slide because this is the end. Huh? I'm not going to rush. No, we already talked about a lot. But I wanted to just clarify a couple of points here because sometimes people get confused by this. All right, so the one point that they say is, okay, so cells obviously require constant inputs of free energy from the environment to buck entropy. Okay, so in other words, interestingly, what our cells need energy for is to try to fight the disorder, AKA it helps you to maintain homeostasis, right? So your cells constantly need energy to do what they need to do. And again, this is done by coupling endergonic reactions to exergonic reactions, as you were trying to say earlier. And now this last couple of points is, I think, sometimes confusing to people. Exergonic reactions break down ATP. So whenever ATP, so for example, we looked at the sodium-potassium pump, we know that ATP is needed for that, right? It's primary active transport, sodium-potassium pump. And that ATP energy is needed to move substances against the concentration gradient from low concentration to high. However, most exergonic reactions make ATP as well, and that's what we were just describing here, is that by breaking down the glucose, which is exergonic, we are producing the ATP that's needed to be utilized in the cells, and making the ATP itself is endergonic. So that's what that means, is that most exergonic reactions make the ATP, but the making of ATP is endergonic. The using of the ATP, which is here, is exergonic as well.
So they're making ATP as they're losing the energy?
Right, so when glucose is broken down,
Using energy to make energy.
yeah, right. Right, anything that loses something has to gain it. So it has to go somewhere. So the glucose being broken down is going to release the energy, so that's exergonic, to make the ATP, to give it to the ADP to make
The
ATP.
to make the ATP for the endo.
Which is enderonic, right. You got it now.
What's buck entropy supposed to mean?
To fight it. Buck means to fight it.
Right, like not picking it up.
Buck up. It'll get better. No, I don't know what that's like a different meaning of buck.
I mean,
They buck heads. Here, like antlers, they buck.
I know there's buck heads. That's buck heads?
That's how I was taught. That's why the male deer is called a buck. This would be bucking.
One thing I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, the last